To celebrate the centenary of Gawler High in 2007, I wrote the history of the school. It shone a light on the early years prior to the First World War, through the Great Depression, the ominous years of the European crisis leading up to World War II, the valiant war effort of students and old scholars throughout these difficult years, the optimistic post-war era in the 50s, the swinging 60s, which saw the move to the brand new buildings on Barnet Road, the 70s, with its dramatic increase in enrolments, rapid change in the 80s, featuring a new gymnasium and exchange programs, the momentous years of the 1990s leading to the new millennium, and the first decade of the new century, which were the last years of the school as a high school before it transformed into the present all-age Gawler and Districts College at the start of 2013. I had the honour of being the first and only woman principal of Gawler High and its longest-serving leader. I will always treasure the memories of those 15 years, and I have to say nothing pleases me more than seeing people like Josh McConnell here tonight, who I was a mentor for when he was applying for university entrance and has been enormously successful. So it's just fantastic to catch up, as always, with old scholars. Gawler High boasts former scholars who are war heroes, well-known athletes, writers, scientists, politicians, journalists, great teachers, and women and men in every walk of life whose recollections I call upon in this talk. Their words are recorded in the yearbooks which I trawled through when I recorded the history of the school in the book This Is Who We Are, Gawler High School, 1907 to 2007. In their own special way, they contribute to our understanding of this wonderful town, where I have lived for nearly 50 years with my husband, Brian Winder. I will take us through the decades by recalling some of the key events of this learning community. What struck me as I read through articles in the yearbooks and magazines was a strong sense of the special character of the school and the genuine fondness for it, which remains strong throughout people's lives. Can I ask how many of you have a connection with Gawler High, went to Gawler High? Okay, thank you so much. Theirs is a unique record of a very special place, and here are a few highlights. I will use many direct quotes from what the students wrote over a century. So let's start with 1907 to 1932, before the magazines. The first Gawler High yearbook did not appear until 1932, so the main records for the first 2.5 decades are enrolment registers and a handful of grainy photographs of 1 or 2 single-sex classes of boys and girls. However, the first edition, printed by the Gawler Bunyip, appeared in 1935, the first yearbook. Very helpfully, it features a history of the school from 1907 to 34, thanks to 2 teachers, Mr. Bennett and Miss Finch, who reprinted several articles from the Bunyip. Key information from those early years paints a picture of academic scholarship winners, the effect World War I had in decreasing numbers in the senior years, solid job prospects for many old scholars, the major role of sport in the life of the small school, and strong bonds maintained with old scholars. 1907 to 14. In 1907, the continuation class in connection with the new school was opened. It became Gawler District High School in 1910 and was held in 2 rooms at Gawler Primary School until the new school was built on Lindop Road. Here. Mr. E.G. Mitten was the first headmaster. By 1912, the Adelaide Press referred to the highly meritorious service done to the state by the teachers of Gawler High. That year, 3 out of 4 exhibitions offered by the government, that is scholarships, tenable at any secondary school, were won by Gawler High School students. The winners were Reg Coombe, Frank Mugford and Frank Garrett. The war years, 1914 to 18. At this time, the senior classes decreased because many students only stayed at school for 1 year. They were needed on the farm or garden while older brothers or fathers were away at war. 1916 saw the inauguration of the first prefects and the first high school council. During the Great War, 97 old scholars enlisted. 7 paid the supreme sacrifice. In 1920, an honour roll, I'll just get down to that. An honour roll was erected and memorial trees were planted in memory of the dead. They are still at the Emmanuel School on Lindott Road. There were brilliant students from 1919 to 22. More distinguished themselves in the public examinations. Students won the £200, a considerable amount then, Country Student Scholarship tenable at the University of Adelaide and the Adelaide School of Mines. One was John E. Kindler, who, after a distinguished engineering career at the university, was engaged in important work on the yet-to-be-built Sydney Harbour Bridge. 1923 to 27, the school was prominent in sport, including cricket, football, tennis and basketball. Many girls trained as nurses while boys gained positions in banks or the public service. In 27, the school received a visit from the Governor-General and his wife, Lord and Lady Stonehaven, and the same year a reference library was established with money raised at a school fair. It wasn't a very big library. This is what old scholars remember, and I'll put this at the end of each decade. Old scholars remembering the 1920s. There was Hilda Begent, whose married name was Wilson. She says, I think a Mr. Bills or Barber, ASASM, was headmaster. Behind his back we called him Mr. ASASM. Always silly and sometimes mad. But we were always in awe of him. She says the motto of our school badge was Vade ad formicam. I can find it. And that is taken from the Old Testament, Proverbs verse 6. She said, I still have my badge, she wrote back in the 30s, but looking back even then. 1926 to 28, Daphne Martin, whose married name was Carey, wrote, there was a general course and a commercial course, and not much interaction between the two. I was in the commercial course for my 3 years at the school. It was an all-girls course, which focused on shorthand, bookkeeping and typing. We didn't begin typing until 3rd year, probably because the school's entire stock of typewriters consisted of 6 old, clunky machines. The school headmaster was Mr. Barber, who we thought was very good-looking. Our teachers included Jock Chambers and Joey Bennett. Try this. Oops, no, not working. That's my ineptitude with PowerPoints. But here's, on the extreme right, the gentleman with his teacher with his hands in his pocket is Joseph Bennett. More about him later. I think both were involved in adult education classes, she said, some of which I attended after leaving the school at the end of my intermediate. The 1930s, this was the decade of the Depression, growth in school community pride, and achievements of old scholars, many of whom led distinguished careers, a growing sporting reputation, and there was camaraderie at old scholars' social gatherings, which was an annual Gawler highlight. By the end of the decade, students and staff saw the world beyond the microcosm of Gawler as they expressed patriotic views about the terrible World War. The Depression, 32 was the year the Depression hit hard, and the first Gawler High School yearbook reveals the generosity of students. I discovered help has been given to the needy by the girls. The language is sometimes quaint but very helpful. They've knitted up wool into undergarments and socks. The money was taken from the sports fund of both boys and girls. There were reunions. These became a memorable feature thanks to Joseph Bennett's unflagging efforts. In 1936, the headmaster, Mr. Flaherty, had a plan for an Old Scholars Association, which was heartily welcomed. Seeing old friends and renewing their connection with the school was the object of many visitors to Gawler on June 27th. Mr. Bennett carried out his presidential duties very thoroughly. At the Regal Theatre, he expressed pleasure at seeing such a splendid gathering. The committee desired that the various functions would afford every opportunity for old scholars getting together as much as they could during the weekend. Some well-known hymns would open the way to the soul and prove an inspiration. And then there was the ball, special occasion and a great success. We learn about the record crowd, an up-to-date orchestra and tasteful supper. There were sandwiches, 40 loaves of white bread, striking decoration with the ceiling hung with red, blue and green tango streamers, and a rockery complete with plants and fish pool. In the place of honour in front of the orchestra, novelty items were provided. There was a demonstration of the quick step and tango, and Miss Josie Weaver presented her tap dance. So that was the ball that year. Then there was the Foreign Correspondence Club, founded by Mr. Chambers in 1935. It was seen as a valuable asset to the school. Letters were eagerly received almost every week. Students correspond with boys and girls in many different countries, which include Canada, USA, France, Switzerland, Germany, Java, and Ceylon. It is surprising how little is known of Australia overseas. Even in USA, one wrote, of which Australia is a good customer. In one letter, I read the following appears: "Please write to me in English, as I cannot understand Australian." Sports Day. Observations from 1937 give us a lively insight into typical events as well as what students wore. They came in a variety of garments. Some came in white shorts, white shirts, running shoes, some in brothers' trousers shorn to the knees, and behold, tennis shoes. All had one purpose in mind, to be the first to break the white string. There were races of all descriptions: broad jumps, high jumps, hop, step and jump. Most of these events were won by boys with long legs. Supporters of each house threatened to burst their lungs. "Come on, Angus, wipe them parasites off the map," yelled one small boy. This is me quoting a long article by a student. The main event was the obstacle race, consisting of 5 obstacles which, thanks to Mr. Higgins' inventive genius, were exceedingly difficult. An example was a tarpaulin. Heaven knows what happened inside. From the outside it looked like a polar bear with convulsions. The worst obstacle was the hanging bag, the most entertaining incident occurring here. A large, clumsy fellow known as Swat was caught in his bag. Try as he would, he was stuck fast. Then he hit the ground with an alarming smack as his bag broke. So that was Sports Day. Then the European crisis. 1938 marks a departure from this happy innocence of previous publications because of the inevitability of war. An old scholar, Mrs. Gray, Leonore Weebush, she was born, lived in England at the time, 1938. London looks ghastly, she said, at present, with all the trenches, sandbags, anti-aircraft guns manned day and night. The crowd looks very anxious, and everywhere one goes, one only sees worried looks and haggard faces. Nevertheless, given our own historical perspective, we can only smile wistfully at the naivety of the following trusting observation. I guess you all listened in to Mr. Chamberlain's speech the other night. He was marvellous. One has a lot to be thankful for that we have men like Chamberlain at the helm. Another old scholar, young journalist and author Max Fatchen, had a more balanced perspective. When someone sent him a school tie, he wrote, "It helps me to remember not to forget you and the old school. I owe more to GHS than Mr. Chamberlain owes England, or the News Limited owes me." So, old scholars remembered the 30s. Our headmaster was Mr. Barber and sportsmaster Mr. J. Chambers, and there were several very bright girls and boys in our class. This is by one Don Stewart, who attended from 1927 to 1932. But what with the Depression in full swing in the early 30s, no jobs, no money. We had some very good footballers in our team. Bert Filsell, Lindop, Laurie Rusby, Gawler, both went into the league, Adelaide, in school. Bert Filsell made SA interstate team. Then Marjorie Renfrey, her married name was Kat, 1936-37. I look back on that time with happy memories. Gawler was a central location and students travelled by train from Tanunda, Roland Flat, Lingdock, Hamley Bridge and Roseworthy each day. Others boarded during the week. With Carol and Lorraine from Stockport and Lewes, I shared a room in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Menz. My parents had a small farm in the mid-north, so I spent weekends with my grandparents and went home at the end of term. 1934 to 38. Max Fatchen, who was interviewed in 2006 by Year 11 students Laura Marin and Michael Kierville, they asked him many questions like, "Did you send your son to Gawler High?" He said, "All our family went to Gawler High, 2 sons and a daughter. There was no honours class, so they had to go to Adelaide High." Another question he was asked, "What were your aspirations, Mr. Fatchen?" He said, "I think it was to involve myself because I suddenly got this great love of English. I always wanted to be a writer. While everyone was outside playing, I was good at cricket. I spent my time in the library and I was captured by the English language and all the great poets." Max also devoted a lot of time in the interview reminiscing about what a typical school day was like. Mostly, and I've read all of it, he recalled all the food he ate, especially the saveloys and cakes he bought on fundraising tuck days. The 1940s. I named these years the valiant years in my 1995 publication celebrating the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. These years were dominated by daily struggles of students, staff and citizens of the town to support the war. Once again, old scholars figure prominently in the history of these momentous times. Joseph Bennett's work was enormously important in this decade. He was a science master for nearly 40 years until his death in 1947. Jubilation at the end of the war was palpable in the joyful descriptions of celebrations in Gawler. In the years which followed, the transition to peacetime was challenging locally and nationally, but by 1949 the school had a relatively broad curriculum. Thriving clubs like the Literary and Debating Society, regular music concerts, and plenty of sport and athletics activities. Then there was the Gawler High practice of raising money out of nothing, and fundraising for the community became routine during the war years. In 1940, the school contributed to the Girl Guide Thrift campaign. One wrote, "Collecting is not a very pleasant task, but there's generally a humorous side to it. Every Saturday morning from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, we're on the go with prams and carts all around Gawler." Old scholars in the war effort. So despite the huge popularity of annual reunion festivities, they decided to put money from subscriptions in 1941 to better use. The subscriptions of £1 shilling per member, with a donation of £10 from the association funds, provided each member going overseas with an appropriate gift or a canteen order. The worst year, that was the heading by the headmaster, Mr. Potter, in 1942, describing the year as a very gloomy one. There seemed no chance of the war drawing to a rapid close, and the Japanese bombed Darwin. Despite this depressing situation, staff and students kept going as they had done for the previous 3.5 decades. Mr. Potter wrote, "As a school, we have felt the pinch. Many students have had to take the places of brothers and sisters who are serving. This has meant a decrease in our numbers and consequently a decrease in our staff. But it has not meant any lowering of standards." There were war heroes in the valiant years. In 1995, I wrote the small book, The Valiant Years, with a teacher and parent commemorating the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. Laurie Bray, a returned prisoner of war, attended the book's launch. As an old scholar, he had attended a school assembly to give an account of his experience as a POW. The high honour of the Order of the British Empire was conferred on Lieutenant Cyril Cole. The Distinguished Service Cross for meritorious work in the Royal Navy was awarded to Lieutenant Ian Harris. The next headmaster, Mr. Nichols, noted there were 9 winners of the DFC. Not many schools can claim a better record. He congratulated Max Bartler, Ron Bint, Henry Day, Clem Hayden, Todd Hilton, Malcolm Kemp, Ron Dew, Frank Lillicrap and Rex Whitburn. Old scholars who made the supreme sacrifice were Chris Cox, Frank Klukas, Harry Dawkins, Lance Davis, Clive Fiddock, Jack Forby, Ross Hoare, Fred Mitchell and Reg Smith. 1945, peace at last. This marked the end of the war in Europe and the Pacific. It was a time of mixed emotions for the school, poignant letters written by old scholars before they died, for example. Each one mentioned the school. There was euphoria on August 15 when Mr. Menzies broadcast news of the end of the war. Joan Lawrence wrote, "By 11 o'clock the main street was a seething mass of happy, excited people, young and old, all rejoicing. Processions were formed, young people marched up and down the street. The world was at peace again." Food for Britain. Only 2 years after the war, it was still necessary to help Britain with basics like food parcels, because peacetime food production was only slowly getting back to normal. As a child in London, I remember there were rationing books, little brown coupons that my mum went to get, used to go to get bread once a week, little Hovis bread and a small amount of butter, 2 rashers of bacon, 3 or 4 eggs. The food production took 7 or 8 years to get going again. But one recipient from England replied, "You should have seen my husband's face as I unpacked the parcel," that is from Gawler High, "into his hands and spelled out on his fingers the story. For he is left deaf, dumb and blind. You would have been repaid for your sacrifice if you could have seen his joy." Gawler High, London, after the Blitz. The late Mr. Bennett. The loss to the school community of Joseph Bennett cannot be overestimated. 2 separate tributes appeared in the 1947 yearbook. The staff tribute said, during his long period of service, this is just a tiny extract, he exercised a lasting influence on the youth of the Gawler district, loved his students, and it was his delight to follow the careers of old scholars who themselves will remember him with affection and gratitude. Old scholars remembered As president, he always exercised a kindly, wise influence upon the policy of the association. In addition to that, a large part of the secretarial work and the organisation of the records has fallen on him. Willingly did he shoulder all the burdens imposed on him. When I was principal at the school, I ensured that the Centenary Corridor in the main Barnet Road building displayed the embossed copper memorial plaque. What did you? To Mr. Bennett. It had been donated by the old scholars in 1948. Then there was infantile paralysis, which swept half the world. Sobering reminder of the harsh facts of the polio epidemic which swept Australia in the 40s and early 50s. I came across fleeting references to infantile paralysis in the 1948 prefect induction ceremony. It was a devastating virus throughout Gawler and South Australia and had an effect on school activities. Here's some old scholars remembering the 40s, 1946 to 49, Peter Trelaw. In first year we had a choice of Latin, drawing or bookkeeping. I chose drawing and obtained an intermediate certificate at the end of second year. With the dynamic teaching of John Chambers, we covered a 3-year course in 1 year. 1942 to 45, Shirley O'Day, mother of Lisa Ondagi. Shirley O'Day was born Shirley Newman. She says, I was a student at Gawler High for my secondary education and after qualifying as a teacher, spent some years at Oakbank area, Croydon Girls Technical High School. After my marriage, I transferred to Gawler High but took leave when our first child was on the way and then became a full-time mum, caring for our 3 children, Jane, Lisa and Daniel. Of course, they completed their secondary education at Gawler High School. My husband, Martin O'Day, served on school committees and became chairman of school council. It was always a delight when I met up with someone in Gawler or elsewhere in the state who says jubilantly, "Hello, Mrs. O'Day, you used to teach me. Remember me?" All teachers know that phrase, remember me, or you won't remember me. Our daughter Jane is a teacher at Loxton High, Lisa too, a qualified teacher now living in the USA. Her athletic achievements are well known. Daniel completed an honours degree in economics and has a prominent position in the ACT Treasury. So the 1950s, post-war decade which was full of promise of greater prosperity. A more peaceful age and, at the school level, better facilities. Migrants from Europe helped build a more culturally diverse Australia, and newcomers were welcomed into the school community. There were grand celebrations when young Queen Elizabeth II visited. The age of television dawned. At the end of the decade, debutante balls became red-letter days in the school calendar. Max Fashion visited. As one of the school's most famous old scholars, even then, Max maintained a close connection with the school and its students for over 70 years. In the 50s, he visited for an assembly and he said, I went back to Gawler High School this week. He wrote this in the Advertiser. There's no tie like the old school tie. I sat in my old seats, the one at the foot of the class and the other one in the corner. I said to my geography master, don't you remember how I got a credit? He said, anyone who can shift the Mississippi deserves credit. The students were waiting for us in the assembly hall. They stood as I entered. They had to stand a great deal for me later on. Then there was the coronation. At the start of this momentous year, it was very much the start of a new era. Headmaster noted there were 257 students and a total of 3 first-year classes. When I was principal there, we had just under 1,000. He shared his opinions about the dangers of a narrow and insular view of Australia. So this is the headmaster of 53, writing, "Someday, Australia with other nations must decide to grow food to feed all needy people, to love men of every race, colour and creed, and to demonstrate love by action instead of words only." Coronation March. All Commonwealth countries held marches and celebrations. One fourth-year student wrote, "We decided to view the elaborate coronation decorations in Rundle Street before taking up our positions to watch the parade. Much thought and preparation had been put into the beautiful, colourful window displays. We took up our positions opposite Adelaide Town Hall and prepared for the long wait as the clock struck 11:30 and the Governor, Sir Robert George, arrived in a sleek black car." And it goes on and on. In 1954, there was the visit, of course, by the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. So she embarked on a tour of every country in the Commonwealth. The headmaster summed up the sentiments of the students and staff when he opened the 1954 magazine with these words: "School children throughout Australia will remember throughout their lifetime the year 1954 when they were favoured by a visit from Queen Elizabeth II. They discovered to their great delight that she possessed all those regal qualities they might hope for in their monarch, together with an inherent power to call forth the utmost in service and loyalty." That was in 54. It was an outstanding success. And it was during this year that one of the councillors suggested that each house at the school have a prince and princess. We felt we had hit upon the ideal method for a school competition. So, just try and get down there. There we go. So, these are the princes and princesses of 54. It was a memorable occasion and students were very excited, especially if they went to see the Queen. One family rose early on the morn of March the 19th. All were excited. We were going to see the Queen. My sister and I left at 6 a.m. We were going to Adelaide by bus. The crowd was quiet and orderly, and it goes on and on, but I'll just get to the end of it. The crowd cheered and waved, but I was too dumbfounded to take any part in it. When I eventually came to my senses, she realised the Queen's car was coming past. The car was gone round the corner. The great moment had gone, but I carried away good memories of it. She didn't see it, but she remembers the joy of the occasion. And then, this is about girls. In an original contribution by a second-year boy, we are bluntly confronted with the very different and quite sexist prejudices which were commonly held then about girls in the middle years of the last century. One wrote, this is a boy, "I know an older boy whose various little adventures I closely observed. The first of these was a brunette, no name for the girl, a brunette, who frequently visited us. I noticed that a certain car was out 7 days a week. Through this particular girl, the brunette and my friend had a row, and a blonde stepped in. No names. The blonde had beautiful hair and a somewhat husky voice." A question I've often thought about is whether girls can drive a car as well as men. This is what the boy wrote. So this is what one girl wrote. "In the days before equal opportunities, women were seen as the weaker sex. As we've just seen, it was a pleasant change then to listen to the words of this girl," I need to read them, "as she speaks her mind. Speaking for the so-called weaker sex," she wrote in the mid-50s, "I wish to complain about the infuriating and quite unnecessarily condescending attitude of men towards women drivers. Why do men always lend a willing hand to help a male learner when all they can do for a struggling woman is grin stupidly and ask after the condition of the neighbourhood's telegraph poles. 1958, it was the year of the appearance of television in Australia. And the headmaster, Mr. McCarthy, who was just there for 2 years, most of the principals were there for 2 years, he commented several times in the mag, the one glaring disadvantage of television is the cost of the receiving set. £250, it's a lot of money, is quite a blow to the finances of most homes, and I think many people will buy theirs on the hire purchase scheme. He expresses concern that most of the atmosphere and some of the thrills of the sports ground and the racetrack will be lost. Old scholar successes, so just as in later years, old scholars pursued careers in the public education system, and a number were on the school staff. Others were well-known league footballers. It was Elsie Morris, who became principal of Adelaide Girls High School, Colin Louch, senior master at Mount Gambier High, Reg Baker, Shirley O'Day, Gregor Ramsey, Carol Masters were on the staff. Reg Baker's there in the front row, second from the right. John Bubner, Dennis Parham, Bill Wedding were all successful league footballers. Then there was the French choir. With the arrival of the new French teacher, the dedicated and exciting Madame Ninette Moussali, students had the opportunity to sing in French at public occasions. I was in Madame Moussali's choir at Elizabeth High, where she went after being at Gawler High, because we had a leaving honours class and they didn't at Gawler High. So a lot of Gawler High students came to Elizabeth High. A student wrote of Madame Moussali, the year marked the beginning of our French choir with the arrival of our French mistress. At first, attendance was once a week, lunchtime, that the choir met with some difficulty as singing in another language was not an easy feat. She describes the punctilious demands of Madame Moussali. Before 5 minutes are up, Madame is heard, "Girls, girls!" and a string of unintelligible French follows, the gist of which was that we didn't reach the right note. "Play that again, Alison," she says. Poor Alison, time and again, plays that note. Why does it sound so easy when Madame sings it? But the note, 2 octaves above middle C, is hard to reach. Old scholars remember the following. This is Dartza Atrins, Bordeaux, Australia, whose married name is Dartza Darzins. She was there from 1950 to 54. My father was a professor of engineering at the Baltic University in Hamburg, Germany, and my mother studied law and had a law degree from the University of Latvia. I came to Australia with my family in 1950. Dartza speaks of the excellent teachers she had and of how helpful some of them were. Mr. Chambers assisted my family. He figures often. He gave us an Aladdin lamp, as my family had no electricity where we lived. We had been doing homework by candlelight. Dartza went to university, became a German language and literature teacher at Marion High and Unley High, and one of her students gained the highest marks in South Australia. She was awarded the Order of Australia for her services to the Latvian community, and she kept in touch with several classmates for over 50 years and is a patron of the foundation. In the 60s, the swinging 60s, marked a decisive break with the post-war years. Society was rapidly changing. Enrolments grew steadily, and 1964 saw the move to the new school on Barnett Road. By the end of the 60s, Australia was heavily involved in the Vietnam War and struggling with deep divisions in our society. However, in 1960, these troubled times were still to come, and at Gawler High, there was excitement at the opportunities on the horizon and continuity of the tradition of service to the community. The headmaster, Mr. White, noted in 1960, "I have been impressed by the quantity and quality of the service which has been rendered by so many students. He moved on, nevertheless, after less than 2 years. I'm always staggered by that, having been there very happily for 15 years. The new school, news that a new school was to be built on a site near the Gawler Racecourse was met with great excitement. There was a sense that this was the start of a new era. The cost was estimated at £345,000, a modest sum by today's standards. The first stage consisted of 6 classrooms, a science lab, art room, woodwork centre, domestic art centre and admin area. Planning for stage 2 was for a 2-storey precast concrete building on the lines of Marion High. 1962 was described as our great adventure by the principal. One of the challenges of the move was from Lindop Road to Barnett Road was to ensure that first years felt like they belonged to the whole school. They weren't separate, they were in the new school. The Deputy Head, Mr Shermer, wrote, "Weekly indoor assemblies have been attended by both staff and students from Lindop Road. We were present at the induction of the prefects. Our first year students participated eagerly at the second term social and all students mixed freely in the dancing." In the head prefect report of 1962, Jim Taylor, who lives 2 doors down from me and my husband, and Mary Menzel mentioned, "Dancing classes were held this year and the boy prefects kept the hall in good order. One of the pleasing duties at the end of term is organising school socials. This year most of the planning of functions has been left to us." No doubt the dances were very different from today's discos. Television. So we've come a long way since this little set piece about the novelty of TV. Television is a wonderful invention and most of the shows deserve a mention, especially those by Desi Lou, while you mustn't forget old Mr Magoo. Elliot Ness gets a mite tough. The news report keeps us up to date and the epilogue is on rather late. Remember the epilogue? 1963 and another headmaster. In this year, Alf Higgins, who had previously been a teacher, then a senior master at Gawler High, returned as the new headmaster. The previous headmaster had only been at the school a couple of years before he accepted a position as a school inspector. Mr Higgins showed a genuine interest in the history of the school and in the magazine, and he wrote about how the school records from 1907 were a rewarding source of information. He kept every copy of the school magazine in his office and saw it as a means of spreading news of the school's activities and recording them for posterity. As the longest serving principal of the school, I believe he would have been delighted by the colourful and highly professional yearbooks which became a feature of the school. Some of them are on the table there. Student opinion. One student with very strong views, lots of students happily did have strong views, very progressive. He wrote in '63 about what he called the American problem. He wrote, different language, the Negroes should be able to go to the same schools. I believe that everybody should have equal rights, no matter what the colour of the skin is. A child wrote that in '63. Another one wrote about Ayers Rock, Uluru, referring to the plan to run a cable car to the top. So this student wrote, cars will only mar the appearance of the rock and destroy its atmosphere. Ayers Rock is something of which all Australians should be proud. I feel that when nature gave us this truly remarkable structure, she meant us to keep it that way. Segregation on the Oval. Another one wrote, we've been told time and time again that to be educated is the sole purpose of our attendance at this school. How, may I ask, does segregation of mixed groups contribute to this? meaning girls separated from boys. The position, as it is now, compels students to ignore the opposite sex, and talking to them is a punishable offence at school. Many friendships are broken and conversations in mixed groups out of school hours has become stilted and awkward. So very progressive views, I thought, from those people. Fortunately, by 1966, the editors bluntly voiced their opinions about the need for change. The editors, students, wrote, insistence on conformity, even in a matter such as school uniform, may cause students to lose individualism, and goes on and on. Gawler High is one of many schools which stick to ageing ideas, he wrote, on education. The aptitudes of many students lie dormant and undiscovered. Gawler High can better the lives of its students by offering them a more comprehensive understanding of life, creating an environment which produces not only students but thinking people. Jubilee year. Yes. The school's Diamond Jubilee was celebrated with what the parents and friends called a mammoth weekend of celebrations in 1967. It's interesting that there's no reference to any activities being held in 1957, which was the 50th anniversary year of the school. Not surprisingly, Mr. Higgins in 1967 took a historical perspective, as well as expressing his concern about standards. As a junior teacher, he said, I came to the school in 1931 and remained on the staff till 1941 when I joined the Royal Australian Air Force. I found the scholars pretty much the same as they are now. But the ability to talk pleasantly, correctly and intelligently is lacking in many of you. Jubilee celebrations. The last year of the 60s, the grand event of this year was the official opening of the Gawler High School by the Education Minister, Mr. Loveday. The commemorative plaque can be seen today. It was still there when I retired 15 years ago, but I believe it's still hiding there somewhere. And the memorial gates were opened by the Director General of Education, Mr. Amanda Jones. See if here we go. Mr. Higgins retired in 1969. It was the end of an era. After nearly 40 years of teaching, I've come to the conclusion, he wrote, that young people in general haven't changed much. They are subject to greater pressures because of the influence of mass media. They are more poised, confident and independently minded, and just as generous. I want to thank the people of Gawler for their friendliness, courtesy, support and inspiration which they gave me in the years 1931 to 40 and 1963 to 69. So, when he passed away, his family wrote to me and sent me a few of his belongings, which I gave to the school library, of course. Old scholars remember the 60s. Here's Michael John Phoenix, 59 to 63. I remember the Lingdot Road site, he says, and the ancient physics laboratory with its aged equipment and long black blinds. John Forrest's macrochemistry class and the experimental alcohol stills. The tiny library in the quadrangle, the pitted tennis courts, and the exodus to the Gawler Institute for our assemblies. Alf Higgins was the headmaster, he said, in my final years, and taught my mother when she was a young teacher. I will always remember Colin Bridson, and so will I, as a colleague, who was a mentor in the best sense of the word. The 1970s. From the point of view of the Gawler High School magazine, the 70s presented a dramatic departure from the formats of previous years. By mid-70s, editorial groups acknowledged the financial problems of producing a professionally published magazine, and there appears to be no magazine or newspaper in 1976 or 77. But the school saw rapid growth, and an open space unit and new resource centre were built. Prefects gave way to the Student Representative Council, and prominent scholars included state parliamentarian and former mayor Tony Piccolo and former Adelaide Crows CEO Stephen Trigg. By 1979, the magazine was back on track with more comprehensive articles and clearer class photographs. It was interesting, there's no reference to any of the past history of the school. So there was a new headmaster. Saw the appointment of Mr. Goldsworthy, whose comments highlight the improvements to the buildings and grounds. He says, "It was a pleasant surprise to me to be appointed to Gawler High and to find a school where careful thought and attention had been directed to the development of buildings and grounds." Then there was a Rotary Exchange student. The school has a long history of welcoming overseas exchange students. In 1970, this Brazilian exchange student wrote, "My name is Tede Loyola from Brazil. I'm 18 years old. Next year I go to university to do economics. I arrived in Australia in February and I couldn't speak any English at all. Of course it was a hard and depressing situation, but with the help of Mr. Murray, who has done so much for me all the time, I'm able to do what I am writing now. I have been happy with my stay in South Australia, and I attribute much of this happiness to Gawler High School." In 1972, there were a few happenings. A notable list of events records the career interests of students and a different state of technology at that time. February the 7th, 932 students. On March the 11th, there was a Department of Labour and National Service series of interviews. July the 3rd, Mr. Anders came and spoke on teaching as a career. There was an in-service conference at the school on the care and use of film projectors. So that was the staff in-service conference. Cross country. One of the school's most celebrated old scholars in athletics is Commonwealth Games medalist Lisa Martin Ondake. As Lisa O'Day, shone from an early age, and this is a quote from the magazine. The school championships, the state championships were held at Brownhill Creek. Gawler fared well, considering some races had over 200 runners. The under-16 girls did a first for Gawler High and were equal first in the team event. A tremendous effort from Lisa O'Day, Jan Martin, Corinna Day and Angela Creed. Then there was storytelling, and Colin Teeley visited in term 1 of 1978. South Australian writer, close friend of Max Fatchen, was a literary visitor. The audience for Mr. Teeley was mainly composed of junior school students. Mr. Teeley spoke of the craft of writing and was able to pass on, in an interesting way, hints for anyone studying a novel or contemplating writing one. There were service awards. One of the students recognised for his outstanding service to the school was Stephen Trigg, CEO of the Adelaide Crows in the early 2000s. When I was principal, he accepted an invitation to speak at one of our Year 12 graduation ceremonies. And the magazine records, Stephen attended Gawler High for 4 years. During his stay, he has shown outstanding talent as a student and also on the sporting field. His sporting prowess was recognised with state representation in an under-16 football team which visited Victoria in '78. He won the Savings Bank of South Australia Award for Best and Fairest in the under-16 team. He was also elected chairman of the inaugural Student Council. So the old scholars remember the 1970s, and I've just got a couple. Tony Piccolo, 1972 to 77, he was there. He says, I came to Australia with my parents, Raffaele and Maria Piccolo, and my sister Antonietta. My eldest sister also attended Gawler High. My parents were contadini, or they worked the land in Italy. My economics teacher, the late John Chambers, was a great influence on me. He always mentions John Chambers as one of his economic tutors, was one of his economic tutors at Adelaide University, Alistair Fisher. Teachers were generally very good, and the school had students from a variety of cultural backgrounds, Tony writes. It was fairly conservative, but I enjoyed my school days. There were many opportunities for extracurricular activity. Tony's career highlights, including obtaining his tertiary qualifications, were as follows: Bachelor of Economics, Adelaide Uni, 1997, Master of Business Administration, Flinders Uni. He topped that year at Flinders Uni. 1981, elected to the Gawler Council, aged 21 in the year 2000. He was elected Mayor of Gawler at the age of 40 in 2003 and awarded a Centenary of Federation Medal in 2006. As we know, he was elected to State Parliament. He wrote in my book, This Is Who We Are, I began in this area of work by joining the University Labour Club in 1978, and he joined the ALP in 1979. He's been in public office for 42 years. Lyndall Boswell, his married name is Bain, Lyndall Bain, 1970 to 74. She says, I remember being nervously excited on my first day at high school, way back in 1970. My sister Ros had preceded me by 2 years, so I had some awareness that secondary school would be okay, and that I would cope with the transition from the small Gawler Blocks primary school to the huge Gawler High School. I was placed in O track and set on a path of studying subjects that might lead to teachers' college or university. I found it very strange. This was because there were too many students to fit into one room. I met my great friend Sue Fromm. We sat together on day one. To this day, we remain best friends. We met other teachers, teenagers from all around Gawler and districts, and as far afield as Williamstown, Two Wells, One Tree Hill and Malala. In fact, many of my friends are from Gawler High School, and one, Barbara Bain, became my sister-in-law. I met her brother James, and he instantly appealed to me. We dated, and in 1977 we married. After being selected as assistant principal at Gawler High when I was principal, Lyndall became principal at Banksia Park International High School, followed by a stint as superintendent, and still in semi-retirement, a consultant supporting new principals. Her daughter Elise successfully completed her secondary schooling at Gawler High and went on to tertiary studies in the field of interior design. Lyndall says, I'm grateful to Gawler High for the rich contributions it made to my life. I feel privileged to acknowledge my long and happy association with the school and its community. Then the 1980s. Years of rapid growth and change with two new principals, Sam Crouch and Don Fraser. By the middle of the decade, there was a new gymnasium. Exchange programs between schools in South Australia and New Zealand were running, and the first computer courses introduced. Sport remained a priority, and students appreciated the new canteen opened in 1989. The difficulties experienced in the 1970s with the yearbook were overcome, and publications from the 80s presented a lively record of a multitude of staff and student activities. In 1980, the new principal, Mr. Crouch, focused on the reality of change by quoting John Donne, "No man is an island entire unto himself." His hope was for the school to illustrate the interrelationship of all human knowledge, to foster an appreciation of man's creative skills, and to stimulate a conception of learning as a continuing, lifelong process. There was another keen exchange student, a very happy one, in 1981, Tricia Moea from Salt Lake City High School in the United States was welcomed. She wrote, "Every part of Australia that I saw was colourful and beautiful. I loved Alice Springs and Ted Egan. Since being in Alice, I developed a concern for the Aborigines. I will really miss the Aussie slang and their attempted American accents, and I hope to take home Aussie rules to show the gridiron team at my school. I wasn't converted to pies and pasties, but I do love Promite, and I'm starting to tolerate Vegemite and driving on the wrong side of the road. Thank you for one terrific year." There was a great music camp as music went from strength to strength, and this camp was in 1982 at the Parks Education Centre. One enthusiastic Year 9 wrote, "Each night we had entertainment. One night we had a saxophone quartet who displayed great musicianship. They were called the Adelaide Saxophone Quartet, and their spokesman was Mr. Doug Nobby Clark. They played a very wide range of music from Debussy to way out modern jazz by Phil Woods and even some ragtime." Then there was the next principal, Mr. Fraser, who lost no time defining some new directions for the school. He announced, "Much time has been spent by school council attempting to secure land for agricultural studies. The cost has to be shared. Our other shared cost project is the school gymnasium." He means shared between council and government. 83 was also the first year students had the chance to compete in competitive horse riding events. It was a bit of a trial, but they gave it a shot. One wrote, "Imagine rising at 6 a.m. on a freezing cold morning to plait, groom, oil and polish your horse. Our events started after the display. The track and rider classes rolled by, but when the bareback rider class was called, many competitors started moaning. One of the requirements was a dismount or slide off, and then a vault or a scramble back on again. Those with large mounts, the task was difficult." 1984, and the principal thanked retirees and looked towards change. Mr. Fraser noted significant changes ahead with the introduction of computing, and the nearly completed gym. He also referred to the new Senior Secondary Assessment Board incorporating the old Public Examinations Board, and how it would provide courses and certificates for nearly all students. He referred to the need for skilled and dedicated teachers such as Mr. Baker, Ridge Baker, and Mr. Brower, who were retiring. Then there's Darren Lehman, a rising star. Senior boys knockout cricket provided the chance for Gawler High's most famous cricketer to show his early form in a match against Salisbury East High. When Darren Lehman came to the crease, he hit 37 from 20 balls, including 3 fours and 3 towering sixes. He was a state representative in under-16 cricket. He plays district cricket with Salisbury, this was all in the magazine, and has already represented them in A grade. Previously with Gawler Central, South Gawler and Sandy Creek, he was selected for South Australia, playing in Canberra last summer. Lisa O'Dakey, and her marathon achievements in 86. A memorable year for the 1997 graduate. There was a full-page yearbook feature on her brilliant athletic achievements as she won a Commonwealth Games gold medal in Edinburgh in August 86. At school, she dominated sprints, hurdles, long jump. In 1978, when she attended community college in Oregon, USA, she won the US National Championships for junior colleges. In 83, she won her first marathon at Huntsville, Alabama, creating a new Australian record. Just 3 years later, her gold medal performance was an Australian and Commonwealth Games record. Then there was a music tour of New Zealand, when Andy Smiles' senior stage band completed a month-long gem of a tour in New Zealand. Highlights of the trip included radio and TV coverage, combined with the Royal New Zealand Navy Band to play the Australian destroyer HMAS Vampire out of Auckland Harbour before it was retired. One of the changes Don Fraser commented on was the reappearance of a new school uniform, marking a clear change from the absence of uniform in the 1970s and most of the 80s. There was also a workshop from James Morrison, the world famous jazz musician. The students talked of their tremendous appreciation and gratitude for the knowledge he shared with them. Computer studies. Students today would find it hard to understand the limited facilities more than 3 decades ago compared to the highly advanced technology which is a normal part of everyday life at school and beyond. There were 12 computers for a school of over 1,000 students, and a mere 10 were added in 1988. Darren Lehman remembers the 80s in this way. School and I was never a good match. I didn't want to be there. I spent most of my time counting down the minutes to the bell so I could get out and play footy or cricket. He was still awarded the 1987 Gawler High Sportsman of the Year trophy. Come my 16th birthday, I was out of there. I regret this enormously. If I had my time again, I would have worked much harder. In my cricket career, I sought advice from people whose opinions I trusted, including David Hooks, Ian Chappell, and Richie Beno. I played cricket for state teams in SA and Victoria, international cricket for Australia, county cricket for Yorkshire. Before it was surpassed by Michael Hussey, I held the record for the greatest number of first-class cricket appearances until this was surpassed by Hussey. So, the 1990s. These momentous years were the last of the century and of the millennium. Constant change became a reality, which meant building on the strong foundations of the 20th century. In the early decade, I was appointed the school's first and only female principal. New facilities were opened. There were student exchanges with Hyuga City in Japan. Our First Nations students started the fine tradition of creating superb artwork for permanent display, and outstanding student achievement of students past and present was celebrated throughout the annual calendar of events. By the end of the century, Gawler High acquired the Bluestone House on the corner of Barnett Road and transformed it into Gawler House Enterprise Centre, and science and technology facilities were undergoing major redevelopment. In 1991, there was tragedy and survival. Mr. Fraser summarised the traumas of that year as well as the resilience of the community. We had a fire, he said, in which the drama centre burned down. Great staff changes and more to come on top of a tragic death. He was referring to the untimely death of student councillor Kay Zadow, for whom he wrote a touching obituary. In the same year, the drama room and art room were destroyed by fire. No, shown that one. Yeah, it's not very clear. Destroyed by fire. There was an art room destroyed as well, and it demoralised the school community. Despite this setback and a short period of mourning, Becky Manier, a student, wrote, "The team got together once again and got on with rebuilding our drama department. We'll be back, bigger and better than ever." There was also the introduction of the 10-year staffing rule, which resulted in many long-term Gawler High School teachers being required to move to other schools. So some of these people were moved because of that regulation. Mr. Fraser retired after 10 years at the helm and focused his predictions on challenges and managing the pace of change. He wrote, The school cannot succeed in isolation from local primary schools and further educational places. It will test patience and willpower. There was the Youth of the Year quest in 1992 and an award for Simon Birmingham. The Liberal politician's final year at Gawler High saw him honoured with major public speaking awards. He won the Lions Pricewaterhouse Australia-wide Youth of the Year quest out of 6,500 entrants. It was held in Newcastle. And he also came runner-up in the Plain English Speaking Awards held at the University of Adelaide. He spoke about the freedoms and values of Australian society. Well, I was appointed as the first female principal, and I did actively promote student voices and their diverse successes academically and within the broader community. In my very first yearbook article at that school, I wrote about the initiative of celebrating success assemblies and the enormous range of student achievement, as well as the improvements to buildings with the new drama centre, growing by the week, and welcome improvements in technology studies and senior science to come very soon after. In 1994, it was about making a difference. So the focus of my second year was on how every single student could make a contribution to their school by committing to achieve in something they were interested in. And then my friend and colleague and old scholar Lyndall Bain, Boswell, won the position of Assistant Principal, Student Services and Staff Training and Development. She was to stay for 12 years. Then there was the launch of the Phoenix Drama Centre. Plenty to celebrate in March. It was aptly named Phoenix for obvious reasons, and it was opened 3 years after that devastating fire by Rachel Healy from the Magpie Theatre Company. At the different shows, there were lead steers. It was a good year for agriculture students at both Gawler and Adelaide shows. With the school winning the Gawler Show competition, Agriculture Senior Brian Burt wrote, in acknowledgement of the dedicated service the students gave to the beef cattle. Sports stars, upholding the school's fine reputation as one which produced champions, they included Chris McDermott in swimming, Kelly Wilding in track and field, Mark Clayton in football, Raymond Ronan in hockey, Adam Jeffrey in hockey. They were all distinguished at district, state and national level. I'm sure there were others. Remember, I'm quoting from the yearbooks. I'm sure you know of many more. 1995, and the tradition of celebrating success. I wrote of new traditions and recognised academic, sporting, performing arts and community achievements. Poetry. This had been a feature for years, and in the 90s, celebrated Australian poet Jeff Guess, a long-term Gawler High teacher, initiated an annual award for the best poetry. Duke of Edinburgh Awards for outdoor education in the 80s and 90s. A number of interested students were trained by Joyce Heinges and Pauline Barton to complete their awards. There was a basic training camp held at Parrawhite Study Centre, followed by a rock climbing excursion at Morialta. Community liaison in 1996, Larissa Patterson. Her 3 children all attended the school. She went on to become office manager and secretary of the principal and leadership team, and retired from the school in 2018. She wrote of her rewarding work, her words, talking to small businesses to encourage their support, keeping a stream of stories flowing to Bunyip to promote the school community, encouraging parents to play a part in the school, organising coffee tours for new parents, the popular Huga City Japanese exchange visits, and so on and so forth. Then there were, the valiant years. Copies of the book are over there. 1939 to 45. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, I published a small history book to remind the whole community of the courage and valour of old scholars. And here's a quote from Laurie Bray's comments, remembering when his unit was told of the fall of Singapore. It's all over. I'm sorry to say Singapore has capitulated, and all of you are prisoners of war. Laurie spent the next 3.5 years as a prisoner of war. When he returned home in 1945, he weighed 4.5 stone. 1997, senior band recognition. Under the energetic direction of Peter Zebrecki, the senior band continued the school tradition of entertaining the whole community. The band, I remember it coming here and me sitting here and listening to a terrific concert. The band was invited to entertain a number of children's groups, and there was great pride that they were invited to perform at Government House in 1998 at the SABSA Merit Selection Awards. In his column in the Saturday Advertiser, Max Fatchen praised the band, saying, "It made my old spirits come alive and sent them soaring over the trees." 1998, the Aboriginal Visual Art Project. This year marked the beginning of what's now a widespread recognition of outstanding works of art and academic achievement by First Nations students and their non-Indigenous friends. The project became an award-winning cultural feature around the school, celebrating cultural diversity. They created places around the school sharing First Nations stories and beliefs. These contained their hope that their culture could grow strong with other cultures. Still getting there. There was the Seaman Science Summer School, where Year 10 student Nicola Jones won a Rotary Seaman Science Summer School. Just a few years later, she gained her first class honours degree in engineering at the University of Adelaide, as well as winning an Academic Women of Achievement Award from the Gawler branch of Zonta. In her letter of thanks, she said how much she enjoyed the electronics, robotics, astronomy, zoology and telecommunications, and that she found the physics work the most interesting. So much for people that say girls aren't interested in science. 1999 and the end of the millennium. The school was thriving. One of the highlights, many highlights, was the successful bid to the Minister of Education, Malcolm Buckby, for Gawler House, next door to the school. It was developed into the Careers Centre with a vocational education and careers course. Then there was the State Rugby Championships. It was only a matter of time before enthusiastic and talented rugby players from the school would top the state. After winning the Northern Zone regional finals, they were up against the winners of other zone finals, Ranella East, Blackwood, Para Hills, Tumby Bay, Swan Reach. In the grand final, they beat Blackwood 36-26 and were selected to represent SA in the under-15 schoolboys rugby league team. Old scholars remember the 90s. Matthew Nesbitt, 1993 to 97. A teacher at the school from 2002. So I was principal when he was a student and then a teacher. He had many fond memories, including the graduation ceremony, sports day, and representing my school in tennis and athletics. Several teachers went out of their way to help me, enabling me to gain entry to university. They influenced my decision to become a teacher. I enjoyed many of my subjects, including physical education and art, senior history and biology. However, I achieved the best results in physics. He went on to become a fine English teacher. I made many lifelong friends, and enjoyed returning to Gawler High to teach. There are others, but I'll move on to the 21st century. The school was going from strength to strength. At the start of the new millennium, which heralded a decade of innovation in all aspects of school life, the popular new motto, "A history of achievement, a future of potential," was adopted. There was a strong focus on preserving the natural environment and ongoing celebration of many achievements. By 2006, not 1906, the Gawler High School Foundation was launched, And old scholars from 7 decades spoke at the Back to School Day Assembly in 2007, my last year before retiring. It was dominated by centenary celebrations, with the high point being the May the 20th Back to School Day in May, which was attended by over 1,300 people. There was optimism and hope in the year 2000. It was the long-awaited opening of the architectural award-winning new Technology Centre and the start of renovations on the stone house on the corner of Para and Barnett Roads. I'll skip a couple of slides, but the Gawler House Enterprise Centre prepared young people under the leadership of the coordinator, Jill Brindley, further education, training and employment in vocational and enterprise programs including tourism, horticulture, hospitality, building and construction and landscape maintenance. In 2001, the Enterprise Centre was honoured by the Australian newspaper as one of the top 10 schools in Australia in the field of innovation. Six independent educational experts selected Gawler High School from over 320 schools from across Australia. There was Aboriginal student achievement when Andrew Franklin was the first Aboriginal student to win a scholarship to the Australian Science and Maths School. He went on to study engineering at Flinders Uni. Another achievement was the completion of the reconciliation mural by students. Over a decade, First Nations students have built an enviable reputation for their stunning artwork. 2001 saw their completion, with artists from Murray dreaming of a vast mural celebrating reconciliation, which was hung above the foyer, in the foyer above the staircase. There were also quite a complex and interesting jigsaw mural hung all along the upstairs corridor. In 2002, world events were noted by valedictorians Lyndall Edson and Samuel Batson, who spoke of the impact of world events, good and bad. Their speech included mention of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the Bali bombings, ongoing conflict in the Middle East, Leighton Hewitt as world #1 tennis player, and student responses to all of these. The 2002 Aboriginal student presentation saw some major academic achievements. One of the traditions I established was the annual Aboriginal student presentation to parents, teachers and friends, along with Janet Elliott, the wonderful student counsellor. In that year, the school had the highest number of Indigenous students of any school in Australia, 20, not only completing Year 12, but continuing on to tertiary education courses. This was noted by one of the students' speeches, who mentioned that Megan Barlow went on to study Indigenous social work, Simone Taylor studied psychology at university, Melissa Wilson became a hospitality chef, Karen Burgermeister became a lawyer, and Emily O'Brien, who studied drama and the Gawler language at Flinders Uni. Student counsellor Janet Elliott was recognised for her initiatives in her ongoing support of First Nations students. I'll skip a few. 2004, there was great innovation with the establishment of a water tank farm and automated irrigation of the Oval. 2005, the school held an Australian citizenship ceremony. And we had a lot of exchange students, but we held a citizenship ceremony, and after studying Australian democracy and citizenship, Year 11 Australian Studies students decided to arrange an actual citizenship ceremony at the school. It became a popular regular feature. We received a small grant from the Curriculum Corporation to organise it. The Mayor, Tony Piccolo, officiated, supported by David Fawcett, the member for Wakefield at the time. The following staff members became Australian citizens: Mark Webb, the groundsman, Larissa Patterson, the principal and leadership team secretary, Sam Brown, a parent, Karen Clifford, a school support officer, and Selena McKenzie, one of the art teachers. It was a sustainable school and one of only 3 child schools in the state selected in the Sustainable Schools Initiative led by Science Agriculture Coordinator Roger Possingham. It offered benefits for all learning programs, it saved energy and enhanced the environment. 2006, living our history. I was always keen for students and staff to see the important role they played in creating the history of their school. I was very pleased that so many school community members clearly understood towards the end of the first 100 years of the school how the story of their achievements was what contributed to this history each week, month and term. So there was a special assembly. And I'll just mention some of the people who came. Brian Tom, old scholar in the 50s, Tony Piccolo, science graduates from university, Kate and Alison Jones, education graduates and teachers, Stephen Oates, Scott Merriman, Matthew Nesbitt, Lynette Fowler, Leanne Poole, Shana Holland, Peter Look and Tony, sport and computer engineering, Adam Fowler, who had captained the state-winning rugby team, and poet Martin Johnson, who I bumped into today. 1907 to 2007 was a century of success, triumphant celebrations and a retirement. My final year was filled with celebrations recognising 100 years of student achievement. Here are just a few. Valedictorian Travis Frisbee was a 2006 cycling champion who won a coveted Pierre de Coubertin Award for his ongoing success in national cycling championships. Tim Dickinson, 2006 Gawler High Sportsman of the Year. He might be here, I'm not sure if he's there. So he won a gold medal in 2007 at the World Championships in the junior male bow hunter division for 13 to 18-year-olds against 24 competitors from around the world, including Finland, the USA, Germany, China, England, Estonia and Finland. He was 13 at the time. A diverse group of students formed the Green Crew, which led environmental initiatives. Matthew Pritchard won the John Hillier Overall Award winner for the Gawler Lions Youth of the Year public speaking competition. There was a centenary reunion dinner dance. Oh, so that was big with the foundation, sorry. A lot of sporting achievements. Centenary dinner dance held on May 19 in the ballroom of the Hyatt Hotel in Adelaide, now the Intercontinental. Guests spanned 7 decades, and among the old scholars were former Education Minister Greg Crafter, Brian Samble, Mayor of Gawler at the time, Gawler Identity, Barry Trelaw, and guests who came over from the UK and around Australia. There was a lot of reminiscing, singing of the old school hymn, chanting of the war cry. Everyone enjoyed the displays of historic memorabilia and old photos, and old scholars played in the Matt Lorna Jazz Band. On the back to school day was a day to remember. That was Sunday, May the 20th. Got a picture here of Darren Lehman, who was our guest speaker. It was an outstanding success, a cool, sunny day. Old scholars and staff visited the previous school on Lyndock Road, now Emmanuel Lutheran. The big event was the assembly in the gymnasium, emceed by Lyndall Bain, who was then principal at Banksia Park International High School. The special guest was this man, Darren Lehman, who spoke of how much he enjoyed returning to Gawler and his old school, I recalled the words of the headmaster from 1935, who said, "The Gawler High School is indeed fortunate to have numbered among its ex-students many of whom have made their mark on the world and yet have the inclination to come back and review the scenes of their school days." Greg Crafter spoke of the excellent education he received at the school in the 50s and how he came up on the train to Gawler from his home in Smithfield. He presented a Artist in Residence Award to Brian Winder, my husband, to the capacity audience, along with art students and their teacher Selena Mackenzie. Brian's commemorative centenary sculptures, Wetlands and the Flowers, were unveiled following the assembly. Incorporating student designs, he transformed their work into stunning metal sculptures displayed in the school foyer and the outdoor installation of giant sunflowers, which extended the concept of environmental sustainability and the school's wetlands to the front of the school for passers-by to enjoy. Popular attractions on the day encompassed historical archive displays, music, drama performances, wine sales, student work, morning teas, barbecues. It was an unforgettable day, and just one of the memorable comments I received from the eminent Professor Basil Hetzel, who was Deputy Governor of the state for a while, told me, "I came here to represent my father. I'm 84, and he was born in 1909. I'm so proud to be here today." He came with his wife. These are my final words now. In my final term at the school, my history of Gawler High from 1907 to 2007, This Is Who We Are, was launched in a crowded drama centre. Max Faction launched it actually. At the end of the book, I wrote, "I've been privileged to trace 100 years of the myriad achievements of our students and staff. I've discovered more about the unique talents and the resilient character of the thousands of people who have helped build Gawler High School. As I retire, I reflect on how their creativity and care for their fellow human being is a hallmark of their learning." I've got a list here of the principals, but only up to when I was there, but after I retired, the principal for 5 more years of the school was Greg Harvey, who had been deputy principal with me. I really want to thank the Gawler History team for this opportunity to share my love of the school with all of you. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Sandra, thank you very much, or should I say merci beaucoup. See, my school years are coming back to me, unfortunately. Okay, I would like to ask Josh McDonald to come up and do a vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
I had no idea when I was when I heard about the title of this talk that it was going to be focusing on the history of the school, using yearbooks as the historical material. I had no idea that you would be able to capture so much culture of Australia, the changing culture, the changing society, and the geopolitics within these school documents. I think it was fascinating. I was really interested, and I want to know more. So I think Mrs. Lowrey. I was a
Mrs.
student.
Winder.
It was. I said that for effect because I was a student at the school. Graduated in 2002. It was a good year by the looks of it. Mrs. Winder had I can imagine she was the principal for 15% of the school's history, it seems, and I can imagine thousands of students that were there. You had a lot of influence and impact on people's lives, and on my life. The final day when university was closing, the applications were closing for university. Sandra found out that I hadn't applied, and she threw the the application book in front of me and told me to choose a subject, and that changed my life. And I got a PhD recently, so I wouldn't have done that. No, I just say that because my life would have been a lot different if it hadn't been for Sandra. So I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have a thank you gift for Sandra too, so thank you so much.
Oh,
There we go. They stopped giving wicker baskets now, so it's on to cardboard, I'm afraid.
oh, that's very kind. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Josh.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Josh. That was sprung on him at very short notice, so thank you.